For the first time in a long while, people are going to the theaters again to see Alfred Hitchcock movies. 5 of his classics are right now either in release or about to be. They are Vertigo, Rear Window, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Rope, and The Trouble with Harry. Our man in Hollywood, Jim Brown, this morning begins a 3-part salute to the man who scared us all.
There's a whole new generation of filmgoers and a lot of longtime fans who are again enjoying a look at these 5 Hitchcock films not seen for many years. And over the next 3 days, we'll be talking with some of the stars of these films and of other Hitchcock classics. But where best to begin this report than with the man himself? Alfred Hitchcock spent his professional life briefly popping up in his own films. But after his television series in the 1950s, the rotund image became so familiar that in many cases, he was also the star of the trailer for the films.
How do you do? I am Alfred Hitchcock, and I would like to tell you about my latest motion picture, Marnie. One might call Marnie a sex mystery. That is, if one used such words.
He was a body floating in the river for frenzy.
I'm on the famous Thames River, investigating a murder.
He dined on some feathered friends to help promote the birds.
I've come to feel very close to the birds, and I've come to realize how they feel when... I don't think I'll eat just now.
And Hitchcock took us on a tour of the infamous Bates Motel for Psycho.
Well, the murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on, there was no sound. And mystery, to me, to an audience, has that audience wondering, which is all right. But I would prefer an audience to go through an emotion.
Hitchcock's director's stamp was first applied to The Pleasure Garden in 1927, and that same year in The Lodger surprised moviegoers with a glass floor to show the suspected killer pacing his room. In the decades that followed, a dazzling series of images.
Tell as much story as you can with a camera and not with words. Words belong to literature and the theater. It is true the one thing wrong with silent pictures was that people opened their mouths and no sound came out. That has been corrected, and I find, unfortunately, too much sound comes out of the mouths. The trouble is that most people can't visualize. If they could visualize, they could have a film on paper. In fact, I would go so far as to say, once I've finished working with the writer on the script, I wish I didn't have to make the picture.
Alfred Hitchcock died in April 1980. He was the same age as the century. On his desk, in his office at Universal Studios, the last project he was working on, a film based on the novel The Short Night, a film everyone knew would never be completed. His final public appearance was in January of that same year, when he accepted the knighthood title bestowed by Queen Elizabeth.
Ladies and gentlemen, There is only one master of suspense. From the American Film Institute, Hitch, with our great respect.
But nothing signaled the end of the Hitchcock age more than the final moments of the American Film Institute tribute in March of 1979. Hitchcock was in deteriorating health, and many knew that his one-time star, Ingrid Bergman, hosting the show, herself was suffering from cancer. Her expression in that last embrace said it all. Bergman was one of numerous actresses who worked for Hitchcock over the years. Tomorrow, on Part 2, we'll talk with some of them. For today, Jim Brown, NBC News, Hollywood.
Everyone knows what Alfred Hitchcock's movies were like. They were scary. But what kind of a director was he to work for? Part 2 of his salute to Hitchcock, our man in Hollywood, Jim Brown, puts that question to 4 actresses who know.
Who was tied to the railroad tracks? The woman. It was always the woman who was... What was the serial called in the silent days? The Perils of Pauline. Nobody was interested in the perils of George.
And all of these women have, philosophically, been tied to the railroad track in films directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Women have always played an important role in Hitchcock movies, not only for romance, but as icons of those obsessive images Hitchcock so frequently desired in films ripe with those images. As to the cool blonde that often found its way into his films,
I think this is because I personally, on the screen, have an objection to the type of woman who wears her sex round her neck like jewelry.
In 1953, Hitchcock cast Anne Baxter opposite Montgomery Clift in I Confess, a film about a priest's torment over hearing the confession of a killer. Hitchcock was a man of extreme habits, and Anne Baxter recalls taking Hitchcock's wife Alma for a drive in the country and being late in returning to the hotel.
All these long stone steps going up, and there was Hitch sitting at the table all by himself with his big chop sitting on the plate, looking like this and furious. And Alma fluttered up and said, oh, and everything, we went off the thing, and he looked at me, and it was all my fault. I don't think he ever quite forgave me for that.
2 years later, in 1955, Hitchcock cast a young Broadway dancer in his film The Trouble with Harry. It was Shirley MacLaine's first movie. She played opposite John Forsythe in this black comedy about a body that wouldn't go away. MacLaine says Hitchcock was very sensitive to her inexperience, and she was fascinated by his appetite.
I used to go and watch him eat. That's what I thought was really fun, because he was an artist at eating, too. Matter of fact, he got me so addicted to eating because I was a chorus girl and didn't have any money, and by the time I made The Trouble with Harry, I think I'd only had 2 steaks in my life in New York, because I was living on graham crackers and peanut butter. And we were staying at a hotel in Vermont, the Lodge it was called, in Stowe, Vermont. And I would go and watch him order breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it was such an artistic achievement.
No film of Hitchcock's carries out the theme of the cool blonde and the equation of danger and eroticism more than Vertigo, released in 1958. It is a supreme example of pure cinema, with an on-camera transformation of its female star, Kim Novak, by co-star Jimmy Stewart. Novak remembers Hitchcock's purely technical approach to creating those erotic visual images.
It was so technical. At times, there were scenes that he had in the background a metronome, is that what you call it? One of those going back and forth to carry the tempo of the scene. He wanted me to say it all within a certain... it was really difficult. Instead of trying to reach me on an emotional level that would gear me to whatever level of pace or whatever that he wanted, he liked doing it technically. Everything he thought of, he saw through the camera, everything.
Can't reach now.
The very next year, 1959, Hitchcock gave waiting fans one of his most entertaining films, North by Northwest. This comedy thriller cast Eva Marie Saint as the cool blonde opposite Cary Grant, with its climactic scene one of fascinating juxtaposition and sexual innuendo. Hitchcock called it coming under the heading of pornography ahead of its time.
He worked more with the externals. I remember he said, lower your voice, don't use your hands. See, I gesture a lot. No, I'm not going to do any more of that. Just be a little more cool and composed. And he gave me a few directions like that, and suddenly the character began to emerge in my mind and then in my soul, and I loved playing that sexy spy lady.
1963 found an unknown young model and commercial actress named Tippi Hedren starring in The Birds. And the following year in Hitchcock's Marnie opposite Sean Connery. It was a story of sexual repression. Hedren recently told author Donald Spoto in his book The Dark Side of Genius that during the Marnie filming, she was subjected to a disturbing obsession with her by Hitchcock.
It was a thrill to be in those two films working with Hitchcock. And at the same time, it was very, very sad that there was a possessive quality there that I could never live with. He hated his body. He hated the house that he lived in. And it left very, very deep psychological scars on him that made his life very, very painful. He was a really very lonely, lonely man.
Sardou said, torture the woman as a piece of dramatic. And the trouble is today, we don't torture the women enough.
Tomorrow, Hitchcock and some of his actors. For today, Jim Brown, NBC News, Hollywood.
Our man in Hollywood, Jim Brown, concludes his salute to Alfred Hitchcock this morning by talking to some of the actors who work for the legendary director.
Isn't that? It's Maloney. He's after us. Come on.
No. I said the blue car's gone that way. Has it gone that way? That'll be nothing. Right. Therefore, it must have gone over the edge. Okay, let's go again. All ready? Action!
These are the concluding moments of the set piece for Alfred Hitchcock's 53rd and final film, Family Plot. Bruce Dern and Barbara Harris, two of the stars of its complex storyline. Even at the age of 75, Hitchcock, working with Ernest Lehman's screenplay, was doing a film that didn't bear resemblance to anything he had done before. And in the 90-degree temperature on a mountain road north of Los Angeles, there was Hitchcock directing Family Plot, dressed in his usual dark suit and tie. I asked him about that famous quote that all actors are cattle.
I was challenged on it once, and I said, that is not true. What I probably said was that all actors should be treated like cattle.
Bruce Dern had worked once before for Hitchcock in a minor role in Marnie. But in Family Plot, he was the star, and as it turned out, the last of Hitchcock's screen heroes, a long list of leading men who had performed before the legendary director in scenes worked out carefully on paper long before the cameras rolled.
He knew that the shot itself worked because it's already storyboarded out and it works in his mind, and he knows just how far he's going to go in each take and just exactly what he's going to, end the take on and fit it together with the next take in the editing. So within that framework, he wanted to be fresh, unpredictable, and entertaining. He'd always say to me, "Entertain me, Bruce. Don't put me through these dreadful things I've had with some of these other actors that are always predictable," So he just loved it.
Because I love you. I want to marry you.
John Forsythe starred in 2 Hitchcock features, with Shirley MacLaine in The Trouble with Harry, and 14 years later in Topaz. In between, Forsythe had his first TV series success, Bachelor Father, and was in a segment of television's Alfred Hitchcock Hour, one directed by Hitchcock himself.
He said to me one time, "I've got a film that'd be perfect for you." And I said, "Oh, gee, that's great." He said, "For television." And I said, "Oh, that's not so great." And he said, no. He said, "You're a television star." He said, "A star of magnitude and, and importance. But he said, I put you in that little group there. And he said, Jimmy Stewart and those fellows are in the other group. And I said, okay, Hitch, anything you say. But it was a little disappointing.
And from that other group, Jimmy Stewart was on the screen 4 times as the quintessential Hitchcock actor. Rope, Rear Window, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and Vertigo. I asked Stewart if he knew why Hitchcock had preferred his on-screen image.
I don't know. I've never talked to Hitchcock about it because Hitch would have sort of sloughed it off and said, but I've often wondered about it. I'm very glad that Hitch decided to do it because they were wonderful projects for me, and I consider myself very lucky to have been in 4 Hitchcock pictures.
Rope also provided Farley Granger with one of the 2 times he went before the cameras for Hitchcock. Rope was the ultimate Hitchcock technical exercise, each scene lasting 10 minutes, the length of the film magazine in the camera. And in Strangers on a Train, Granger was involved with Robert Walker in that movie's great set piece, The Struggle on the Carousel.
All these movies that are dedicated to Hitch, you know, a homage to Hitchcock, I wish they'd stop it. Just stop it and think up their own ideas and use their own imagination and stop trying to copy him, because they can't do it. They can't do it. He was unique in his own way. He was a quirky, strange man who loved doing these kind of films and did them better than anyone else has ever done them or probably ever will.
And finally, in wrapping up this series, what do all these people have in common, besides working with Alfred Hitchcock? Well, they often sound like him.
Let me tell you this, John. He said, don't take it so seriously. He said, it's only a film.
I'll never forget it. Sitting there with the thumbs going and twinkling and saying, it's only a movie.
And I'm sure he's sitting up there somewhere, right, and saying, it's only a movie.
It's only a movie.
For today, Jim Brown, NBC News, Hollywood.
Hey, thanks for watching. And don't forget, you can catch the Today Show every morning on NBC or take Today when you're on the go. Just follow the Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.